You mentioned that in your bio. Can you speak a little bit about how your previous occupations or current occupations? Are you still working currently?
Yes, I have a consulting business. It started out 14 years ago with the attempt to manufacture a product, but it's devolved to being simply a microwave measurement analysis and design consulting business. So I can get that done mostly late at night after campaigning all day.
Nice. Sounds perfect. Okay, cool. So speak to me about how your occupation, like you said, is about problem solving and how that applies to what you're currently running for, which is Congress.
Well, throughout my education and working for the Department of Defense, working for various small companies in highly technical areas, you get a lot of problems and you have very low support in small companies. You'll be the only engineer. You're expected to define the problem and to solve the problem. So at the same time that I was doing all those microwave problems, I was looking in dismay at the continuing decay of our democracy as voting rights were suppressed systematically, as the Supreme Court changed rules with respect to campaign financing. And the physicist perspective is always to try to describe a large class of problems by the simplest hypothesis. And the simple hypothesis here is that corporate money is degrading the quality of government, how well it represents people, and it's become a government that represents corporations. And so the problem is actually quite straightforward. How to solve that problem in the practical world is the part that requires some creativity, and it's taken me a long time, but I've come to the conclusion that there is a pragmatic political way to use the current large dissatisfaction to change the system in a fundamental way, which would be to implement public funding of elections. You can't, with the Supreme Court we have, without amending the Constitution, which is prohibitively distant, you can't do anything except public funding, and you can do that. So that is the vulnerability that I am working on exploiting.
Okay. Cool, and you speak a little bit about that in the bio you sent me. That's perfect. So, is this what kind of, I guess, simply put, like, why Congress? Why have you decided now at this point in your life it's time to go after Congress?
Well, I have been talking about the same problems that Bernie Sanders spoke to for quite a long time, but I had no audience, and any conversation had to include a fairly long-winded description of what single-payer health care was, what public funding of elections was, what open primaries are, what ranked choice voting is. And many of these things, some less than others, are now topics of general discussion thanks entirely to the popularizing influence that Bernie Sanders brought forth in 2015 through the 2016 cycle.
Okay. So you think it's time to, now that the public has kind of recognized these problems, you feel it's time to create a platform on it and try to bring this to the attention of Congress and the American government as a whole?
Well, we will bring it to the attention of Congress by going there and being Congress. I have a bunch of friends I have sought out, met, become friends with who are running for Congress across the country, and we're of largely common mind as to what needs to be done when we get there.
Okay, perfect. Let me see where's that. So overall, what are your thoughts on the Democratic Party, your party, as it stands today in 2018?
Well, both parties have been funded by, the national committees have been funded by large donors, by corporate donors, a slightly different set of donors, but with overlapping interests, and their interests have not been our interests. So both parties have degraded the expectations and opportunities of my grandchildren. And when I say my grandchildren, I really can't envision any way in which you say a part of the world. So my grandchildren I count as about 7 billion. We have to start treating each other as family, recognizing that we are one family. And that would solve itself a lot of problems, I believe. You don't have to love everybody in your family, but you try to.
Okay, I got you. So talk to me about your platform, as it were. I see you've got the corruption, which we kind of spoke about, the public funding. Then you got healthcare, national defense, and environment. Talk to me a little about healthcare. How do you think it stands in America today? And you say you've got single payer healthcare, so you're looking at speak about that too, if you don't mind.
Well, single payer health care in some form has been adopted by all economically developed countries, specifically all countries, the OECD, and numerous other what we call third world countries, which actually get better health care results than we get for far less money. The corporate donor owners of our Congress suggest laws to our Congress which get passed, and frequently those laws simply give our tax money to corporations without them actually producing anything. So in 1981, a law was signed by Reagan which said that when the NIH develops, the National Institute of Health develops a new drug, that they are required by law to find a corporation and give our patent, which we paid for, to that corporation. And then that corporation, by the 2003 Medicare Part D law, is empowered to charge us whatever they like to use the medicine which we developed. So EpiPen was a development of ours. Drugs for hepatitis C were a development of ours. Yes, corporations spent some money, but they came in late into those processes and were given the patent, basically. The evidence for that is that other countries don't recognize those corporate patents because they look at the record in their courts and they see that the principal funding and development, the real innovation, was done by our tax money. But we pay the highest prices in the world to use those drugs. In some cases, 100 times more than what people in other countries are paying.
Gotcha.
So the macroeconomics is very clear. Even I can do these big numbers. The subtleties of the law and how they bury different things are complex. You have corporate lawyers who've been working 40 years to hide this theft. But the macro theft is quite evident. The second most expensive country in the world for health care is Switzerland, spending about $7,500 per capita. We're spending in this country $10,500 per capita, and despite that extra $1 trillion that we spend, 115 million of us effectively are not covered by adequate health insurance. that is not true in Switzerland or France or Portugal or Spain or Italy or God's sake, Tunisia or Iraq. We provide single-payer health care in Iraq because Saddam Hussein did before we got there, and we don't want to antagonize the locals that we're trying to pacify too much. So yeah, we have been providing them with single-payer health care, but not our own people. Puerto Rico has long had single-payer health care because it was the cheapest means of providing health care to the poor people there. We kept them poor, but we didn't let them die in previous administrations.
Interesting. Okay. Cool. So I think that definitely covers that. So as a whole, where do you think HR 676 is? I spoke to some of the other people running, and specifically one of the other Democrats, and she's also in favor of HR 676. And she sees that there's some movement around it, but she's not quite sure it's going to make it. Where do you feel about that?
Well, it's interesting. The bill for HR 676 has not been fleshed out, but the intent of the skeletal bill is to provide complete health care with zero copays and zero deductibles to everyone in the United States, and to include from birth to death vision care, hearing care, dental care, mental health care, all these things which are not covered by Medicare. And yes, all your drugs should be cost-free. And when you do all of that, it sounds frightening. It sounds incredibly expensive, but that's what other countries are doing. And the trillion-dollar corruption, the gifts to corporations that I spoke of, obtains when you do fund all of that from the taxes we're already paying, basically. And then you don't have to worry about Alzheimer's care. It's in the program, unless you demand that your representatives not include something, and you can control what is in your contract, because that's what governments are supposed to do, represent the wishes of their people. You can also do other things like encourage personal responsibility. So if you're smoking, your health care costs go up considerably. With a fully government-funded system, meaning each of us committing to take care of all our friends and neighbors, then you can tax cigarettes at a rate corresponding to the increase in healthcare costs associated with their use. You can do other personal responsibility things now which are not available with a private insurance program. The private insurance program means that you get to choose among competing insurance contracts which no one can read, so when you get a sickness which was unanticipated, as sickness generally is, you have no idea what your coverage is for that disease or what doctors you will be allowed to see, whereas with the program envisioned in HR 676, you will be able to see whatever doctor you need to see at the time you need to see them. Now, there is a possibility that the line will be filled up. If you have something critical, you will go to the front of the line. If you just want something cosmetic, you will be at the back of the line, but you will be taken care of.
Gotcha.
So yeah, there are plenty of people who speak of bills without having much knowledge of their content or consequence. I've been working with Dr. Gerald Friedman of UMass Amherst and read his papers on the transition. I know how it will be affected. I know what happens to the 3 million code matchers in health insurance companies and hospitals who will lose their jobs. They will be retrained at our expense and re-employed, and they would be covered generously. And despite that, you still get a very large reduction in overall cost.
Gotcha. All right, so let's move on to national defense and veterans, which is one of the things it seems like is a part of your platform.
Yes.
In terms of veterans, you want to fully fund the VA. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, Ted Yoho in town halls and forums last cycle would frequently say, if there were veterans in the audience, that over half his staff time was spent dealing with individual veterans' issues. Well, I would stand up and say, Ted, if your party did not cut the administrative budget of the VA, if your party did not leave 370 staff positions unfilled at the local VA hospital here in Gainesville, unfilled and unfunded. I'm sorry?
How many staff did you say?
370 staff positions at the last time I checked were unfunded.
Okay.
Then you would probably get zero complaints, because the veterans are not people who whine and complain over nothing. They whine and complain when there is justification. And you have provided, your party has provided them justification, and the Democratic Party has not done very much better. So the national defense discussion that we've had in our Congress has mainly been directed by the military-industrial complex. So you can fund new planes and new ships, the development of new weapon systems, where all the profit is, but you can't get funding to buy spare parts for the planes that are sitting idle and being scavenged for spare parts to keep other planes of the same model in the air. That is a very low priority, and that is insane. But at the same time, we have some systematic ugliness in our war machine, which is military contractors in war zones, and I will seek to ban those entirely. Since we started having military contractors, basically mercenaries, in war zones, we have not won an engagement. And this is consistent with the corporate mission, which is to have a continuing profit stream. Your Halliburtons, your KBRs, your Blackwater Shays, all these companies wish to see unending war, expanding war, because that is the source of their profit. And their profit funds their lobbying of Congress.
Gotcha. Awesome, cool. And finally, environment. So climate change is the critical problem of our time, and that you support HR 3671. Can you talk to me a little bit about that bill specifically, and then just the environment and EPA and whatnot in America as a whole?
Well, the title of that bill is Off Fossil Fuels, and it has a more ambitious goal than any other present legislation of eliminating all fossil fuel use by 2035. Now, one thing which it does not have, which I think is fundamental to the early efficacy of the program, is a substantial greenhouse gas tax. I believe a number like $100 per ton of CO2 equivalent will apply market forces to the migration from fossil fuels to solar and wind, which are already quite cost competitive, which is evidenced by, we have seen in the last 5 years, bills in various state legislatures to make it more costly to put your solar power back into the grid, for example, needing licenses and all sorts of other technical things which there is no technical necessity of. I say that as an engineer. In Wyoming, they actually came up with a tax on the wind. So the wind is turning those wind turbines and generating electricity. We're going to tax that electricity because you're using up the wind. In the meantime, we have an oil depletion allowance for the fossil fuel industry, which awards them for taking oil out of the ground and depleting our resources. They get paid our tax money directly as a gift. The fossil fuel industry and the tax in the budget bill passed this year has what they call permanent guarantee of continuing subsidies. Well, what the Congress creates, the Congress can depose, and that permanence will prove rather illusory.
Okay, I gotcha. Okay, just a few more questions to wrap up. In terms of which is kind of just we'll call it the financing and whatnot. How is funding going for this election? You said Yoho has almost $500,000 already, and then obviously he's in something to might have a bit more people in terms of financing. But how do you think you're doing?
Well, we have in our campaign a message that I have honed and sharpened for 23 months. I have been basically out 7 days a week talking to unselected individuals at festivals, at concerts, at fireworks events, not just the Democrats. I speak to every Trump and Pence shirt that I can find, and I have a message which is powerful, works in this district, and is honed to the people and problems of this district. And I know that by getting that message out, I will win the district. Funding is the usual manner of getting a message out, by postcards, by mailers, even by large email lists that you buy, by radio ads and TV ads. We are using newer technology which is aimed at millennials, but which has some creep over into the even my age group. I'm 67. I know how to text people. And we are using a text forwarding app. We're using new technology for phone banking and door knocking campaigns. We are tracking what we do, and we are doing it, and everything is being done largely by volunteers. Now, this does have an impact upon your endorsements, because without a pile of money in the bank at this point in your campaign, the people who you would like to endorse you do not see that the new techniques are working, and they withhold endorsement to providing endorsement only to candidates that they perceive as financially viable. So it is a problem, and we are working to overcome it presently. I would mention, though, that Ted Yoho will always have 2 or 3 times as much money as I have. If I raise $500,000, he will suddenly have $1 or $2 million. It's not because individuals are ponying up and contributing to his campaign. He has no problem taking money from the NRA. He said in town halls last weekend that the NRA does good work. Well, the NRA has their own version of the Second Amendment, which includes the abomination of state law that's called Stand Your Ground. It includes sanctity for assault weapons and never taking them away, even when there are many red flags. Now, He actually this year, Ted is accepting the fact that there should be red flag laws, and I hear gun owners saying that the sheriff in the county down Parkland did not use the law properly. But I also read that in other instances where sheriffs have taken guns away from people who clearly should have their guns taken away because of expressed intent to use those guns in horrible ways, the sheriff is subject to lawsuit for breaking the very bad laws that the NRA has pushed through a compliant state legislature or national legislature. Assault weapons were banned in 1994, but the law implementing that ban had a couple of deficiencies, the most notable being that it had a 10-year lifetime, which meant for 10 years that lobbyists could give money to every congressman, both parties, every candidate, both parties, and of course at the end of 10 years that law was repealed. A cynic might conclude that the Horizon was put in there in order to encourage the NRA to donate more money to campaigns. But when we change the nature of campaigns and require that allow that candidates be funded with public money, our money for our representatives, and require that the donation of that money be valid only for candidates who are bound to accept no other money, then we can break the chains which are tying us to corporate interests and sharply constraining the prospects of the next generation. But even that simply understates the problem, which we've alluded to more than addressed directly, that if we don't address the climate change problem, then the present roughly 100 million refugees, which have largely been produced by crop failure due to local climate variations that are 1,000-year abnormalities, then all of our children will grow up fighting each other for food and water.
Gotcha.
So there's a definite timetable at which we must do things. And I'm an eternal optimist. I've seen enough Will Smith and Bruce Willis movies to know that we're in the last reel and everything's going to turn around now, because it has to.
Gotcha.
1,400 more times more efficient with our campaign last cycle
Yes.
than Tim Canova.
Yeah. So going back to campaign finance, my colleague here just reminded me that we got 12,500 votes last year on an expenditure of $1,000. That Ted Yoho spent several $100,000 and got 12 times as many votes. I'm sorry, 14 times as many votes.
And so what do you mean by that?
I mean that our campaign expenditures, our message is so powerful that it can be presented, and it doesn't have to be presented 8 or 10 times. You don't have to get flyers and postcards and emails and door knocks and phone banks. Frequently people become committed to my campaign the first time that I or one of my team speaks to them. And they join my campaign in a effective manner, which is a text forwarding campaign.
What we found was that it was 1,400% more efficient than Tim Canova last cycle.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah.
You said here 14% more effective than...
No. Actually, let me see
1,400%.
the numbers. I spent $1,000 Tim Canova spent $4 million, so it was more like, yes, 4,000 times, 2,000 times less money per vote in my campaign. But I'm not.
Gotcha. Okay, I gotcha.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, well, I don't have any more questions for you. I mean, do you have any final thoughts or anything else you'd like to share?
Yes, we have. I would share that many people with positive intent have gone to Congress, and arriving there, they get flipped. And the reason is that it is a environment designed to corrupt. The design in both parties is that each congressman is required by their party leaders to spend several hours a day calling big donors begging for money. And this is a corrupting influence that is quite clear. I have been inoculated, immunized against corruption because I have 8 grandchildren and each of them is a shot in the arm. And I will not deviate from what I am stating here, either now, while in office, or thereafter.
Gotcha. All right, Tom, well, I really appreciate you talking to me. I enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to writing this up.
I don't know how you can type that fast. That's amazing.
Oh, yeah, no, that's, yeah, it's tough. I can abbreviate a lot of my words, but I know them all. Okay, cool, so...
Well, next
again,
time I'll try and use stranger words.
Yeah, there you go. I'll have to look up the spelling of everything. Awesome, I appreciate it. Is this a good number to reach out if I come across anything, I mean, need to clear up with you or anything? I should be good, but just in case.
Oh, I'm available pretty much full time. When is your paper published? When would this appear?
I think this is going to go out next week, so it'll be out on the 17th. Oh, actually, no, sorry, the 24th.
Okay. Well, I hope you'll send.
I can email you a link to the story when it's done, if you'd like.
Very much. I appreciate that.
Awesome. And do you think you can send me a headshot via email?
Oh, absolutely. Do I have your email?
Awesome.
I can't recall.
Yes, we
Okay.
have an email chain. I can give it to you real quick if you need it.
Oh, no, if I don't have it, I will call you back. But I'm pretty sure I have it. I have so many communications, I forget which cubbyhole each one came through.
Yeah, I gotcha. All right, cool. Well, thank you so much.
Wesley, good to talk to you. Take care.
Have a good one.